They said it was the most beautiful wedding the town had ever seen. Clara stood at the entrance in her white gown, shining like the morning sun. Her train stretched 30 feet behind her, flowing like a river of silk and lace. The kind of train only queens wore in fairy tales. The outdoor aisle had been built specially for this day. Fresh flowers lined both sides. White chairs held nearly 300 guests, all dressed in their finest clothes. Cameras flashed everywhere. People whispered about how lucky Clara was to marry into such a wealthy family. Her groom, David, stood at the altar in his expensive suit, smiling wide for the cameras. His family sat in the front row, heads held high with pride. Everyone could see their gold jewelry sparkling in the afternoon light. The music began. Clara took her first step down the aisle. Her heart pounded with joy and nervousness. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The day she had dreamed about since she was a little girl. But what happened next would change everything. What happened next would reveal the truth about love, about character, and about who people really are when disaster strikes. Clara took another step. The crowd smiled and pointed at her beautiful dress. Photographers moved closer to capture every angle. Everything seemed perfect. Too perfect. Then, without any warning, the ground beneath her feet began to crack. A terrible sound filled the air. Wood snapping. Earth crumbling. People gasped and stood up from their chairs. Before anyone could react, the entire middle section of the aisle collapsed downward. Clara's long train went first, pulling her backward with tremendous force. She tried to grab onto something, anything, but there was nothing to hold. Her scream pierced through the music as she fell into darkness. The beautiful aisle had been built over an old, hidden pit. Nobody had checked the ground properly. Nobody had made sure it was safe. They only cared about how it looked, not about what was underneath. Dust rose up like a cloud. The music stopped. Cameras dropped from hands. Guests jumped back from the edge, afraid they might fall too. Some women screamed. Some men shouted. Everyone stood frozen in shock. Down below, Clara lay in the pit, trapped by her own wedding dress. Pain shot through her body. Dust filled her lungs. She could barely breathe. For a long moment, nobody moved. 300 people stood there, staring at the hole where the bride had disappeared. They looked at each other, confused and frightened. Some covered their mouths in horror. Then everyone's eyes turned to David, the groom. Surely he would jump in to save his bride. Surely he would run to help the woman he claimed to love. Surely his love would make him brave. But David stepped backward, away from the edge. His face twisted with something that wasn't fear. It was disgust. His mother grabbed his arm and whispered something in his ear. His father nodded, as if agreeing with an unspoken decision. The microphone was still clipped to David's collar, left over from the rehearsal sound check. When he spoke, his voice carried across the entire venue. Every single guest heard his words clearly. "If she dies, that is her fate," David said, his voice cold and hard. "I warned her about the curse in her family." The crowd gasped again, but this time it was different. This wasn't shock about the accident. This was shock about what the groom had just said. About his cruelty. About his cowardice. His own bride was trapped and bleeding below, and he was talking about curses. Down in the pit, Clara heard every word through the speakers. Her groom's words cut deeper than any physical wound. The man she had loved, the man she had sacrificed everything for, was abandoning her in her darkest moment. Tears mixed with the dust on her face. She tried to move, but her dress was tangled around her legs like chains. Part of the wooden structure had fallen on her back. Blood dripped from cuts on her arms. Above ground, the crowd began to murmur. Some guests started pulling out their phones to record. Others whispered to each other, repeating what David had said. His family members stood perfectly still, their faces showing no emotion at all. The pastors who were supposed to perform the ceremony looked at each other nervously. One of them took a small step toward the pit, then stopped when David's father shot him a warning look. Nobody was helping. Nobody was moving. They were all just watching, like this was entertainment, like Clara's life didn't matter because her groom had declared her cursed. That's when someone else moved. Someone nobody expected. Someone the rich guests had barely noticed when he arrived. From the very back row, past all the fancy guests and expensive decorations, a man jumped to his feet. He wore old work clothes stained with oil and dust. His hands were rough and scarred from years of hard labor. His name was Samuel. He was a roadside welder who fixed broken gates and metal fences for anyone who could pay. Most days he could barely afford one meal. But he had a good heart, the kind of heart that doesn't calculate before it acts. Samuel didn't think about the rich people watching. He didn't worry about his cheap clothes or dirty hands. He didn't care that David's family would judge him. All he saw was a woman who needed help. He pushed past the frozen crowd, his worn shoes pounding against the ground. Some guests tried to stop him, saying it was too dangerous. But Samuel kept running until he reached the edge of the pit. Without hesitation, without fear, he jumped down into the darkness. His body hit the ground hard. Pain shot through his legs. But he ignored it and crawled toward Clara, who lay twisted and bleeding in the wreckage. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was shallow. "Hold on," Samuel whispered, even though she couldn't hear him. "I'm here." Samuel's hands worked quickly. He grabbed the torn pieces of Clara's wedding dress and tied them together, making them into a rope. His fingers bled from the sharp edges of broken wood, but he didn't stop. Carefully, gently, he positioned himself behind Clara. He placed his arms under her shoulders and lifted her upper body, supporting her weight with his back. She groaned in pain but didn't open her eyes. "Someone throw down a rope." Samuel shouted up to the crowd. His voice echoed against the walls of the pit. Finally, some of the male guests responded. They found rope from the decoration supplies and lowered it down. Samuel wrapped it around Clara's waist, then tied it under her arms in a way that wouldn't hurt her more. "Pull slowly," he commanded. "Don't jerk it." The men above began to pull. Samuel pushed from below, using all his strength to lift Clara upward. His muscles burned. Sweat poured down his face. His back felt like it might break. But he didn't stop pushing until Clara's body cleared the edge of the pit. The crowd gasped as they laid her on the grass. Her beautiful white dress was now brown with dirt and red with blood. But she was alive. She was breathing. As Clara lay on the ground, coughing and gasping for air, an old woman in the crowd began to cry. Then another. Then several more. They weren't crying just because of the accident. They were crying because they suddenly remembered something. "That's her," one woman whispered to another. "That's the girl who used to feed the workers." Every Sunday after church, another woman added, her voice breaking. She would bring food to the roadside, even when she barely had anything herself. The memories flooded back. Clara in her simple church dress, carrying plates of food to hungry laborers. Clara sharing her small portions with men who had nothing. Clara treating poor workers like they were human beings worthy of dignity and respect. Samuel had been one of those workers. Week after week, year after year, Clara had made sure he ate. She never asked for anything in return. She never made him feel ashamed of his poverty. She just gave quietly and consistently because that's who she was. Now that same woman was being lifted from death by the life she had once fed. The circle was complete. The mercy she had shown was returning to her in her moment of greatest need. But David and his family didn't care about any of this. As the medical team arrived and began checking Clara's injuries, David stood to the side with his arms crossed. His mother whispered urgently in his ear. His father made phone calls, probably to their lawyer. Clara's eyes fluttered open. She saw the sky above her, the faces of strangers, and then finally David's face. For a moment, hope flickered in her eyes. Maybe he would apologize. Maybe he would hold her hand. Maybe he would show some sign that he still cared. Instead, David stepped forward and spoke into the microphone again. His voice was loud, clear, and cruel. "I'm calling off this wedding," he announced to everyone present. "What happened today is proof that this woman brings bad luck wherever she goes. She nearly killed all of you with her cursed presence. My family and I will not be associated with such misfortune." The crowd exploded with whispers. Some people nodded in agreement, already influenced by David's confident tone. Others looked uncomfortable, uncertain about what they had just witnessed. Clara tried to sit up, tried to speak, but no words came out. The physical pain was nothing compared to the pain of public humiliation. The man she loved was destroying her reputation in front of 300 witnesses. But there was something the crowd didn't know. A secret Clara had kept locked in her heart for weeks. A sacrifice she had made to protect David's family, a sacrifice that had cost her everything. 3 weeks before the wedding, David's younger sister, Michelle, had been caught shoplifting expensive jewelry from a store downtown. The security cameras had captured everything. The store owner was ready to call the police and press charges. Michelle panicked. She called David, crying hysterically. If she got arrested, it would destroy the family's reputation. David's father was running for a political position. A scandal like this would ruin everything. David came up with a plan. A terrible plan. He asked Clara to take the blame instead. "You don't have a public reputation to protect," David had said to Clara, holding her hands and looking into her eyes with fake tenderness. "But my family does. If Michelle gets arrested, my father's campaign is finished. Our wedding might have to be postponed. Everything we've worked for will be destroyed. He made it sound like they were a team. Like this sacrifice would prove Clara's love and loyalty to his family. Like it was just a small thing that wouldn't really matter. Clara believed him. The next day, Clara walked into the police station alone. She confessed to stealing the jewelry, even though she had never set foot in that store. She signed papers. She accepted the charges. She took Michelle's crime upon her own shoulders. The store owner agreed not to press charges if Clara paid for the jewelry and attended mandatory counseling sessions. Clara used all her savings, money she had been putting aside for years, to pay the debt that wasn't even hers. David's family was saved. Michelle cried tears of gratitude and promised to never forget what Clara had done for her. David's father continued his campaign without scandal. Everything worked out perfectly for them. But Clara's name was now marked. The police record existed even without formal charges. Some of her friends heard rumors and distanced themselves from her. Her own mother questioned whether she was telling the truth about what happened. Clara endured all of this in silence. She didn't defend herself. She didn't expose Michelle's lie. She chose disgrace over breaking her promise to David. She thought her sacrifice would prove her worthiness to become part of his family. Now, lying on the ground in her ruined wedding dress, Clara finally understood the truth. Her sacrifice had meant nothing. Her loyalty had been worthless. David had used her like a tool and was now throwing her away. The medical team helped Clara into an ambulance. As they closed the doors, she looked back one last time at the wedding venue. David was already talking to guests, probably spinning the story in his favor. His mother was collecting gifts. His father was shaking hands as if nothing had happened. Nobody from David's family came to the hospital. Not his mother. Not his father. Not Michelle, the sister whose crime Clara had covered. Nobody called to check if she was alive. Nobody sent flowers or messages. They had already erased her from their lives. Clara spent 3 days in the hospital with a broken rib, multiple bruises, and cuts that required stitches. The nurses were kind to her, but she could see pity in their eyes. Everyone had heard about the wedding disaster. The story had spread across town like wildfire. On the 4th day, the hospital discharged her. She had nowhere to go. Her apartment lease had ended weeks ago because she was supposed to move into David's house after the wedding. Her savings were gone, spent on jewelry she never stole. She sat on the hospital steps, still wearing borrowed clothes because her wedding dress had been destroyed. She had no money, no home, no reputation, and no future. She had lost everything. That's when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Samuel, the welder, standing there with his oil-stained work clothes and kind eyes. He held a small paper bag with food inside. "I thought you might be hungry," Samuel said quietly, not meeting her eyes out of respect. "Hospital food isn't very good." Clara stared at him. This man had jumped into a pit to save her life. This man had risked everything while her own groom stood back and did nothing. And now this man was here, offering her food while everyone else had abandoned her. Tears filled her eyes. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you being kind to me?" Samuel smiled softly. "Because you were kind to me when nobody else was. You fed me when I was hungry. You treated me like I mattered when the world said I didn't. How could I forget that? How could I see you suffering and walk away?" He sat down beside her on the steps, a respectful distance away. "My mother has a small house," he said carefully. "It's not fancy. Just 2 rooms and a kitchen. But there's space. You can stay there until you figure things out. No payment needed. No conditions. Just rest and heal." Clara couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight with emotion. She could only nod. Samuel's mother, Elizabeth, welcomed Clara with open arms. The old woman didn't ask questions about the wedding or the scandal. She simply prepared a clean mat on the floor, gave Clara a soft blanket, and told her to sleep as long as she needed. Clara slept for 3 days straight. Her body was exhausted from the accident and the emotional trauma. Elizabeth brought her water and light food when she woke briefly, then let her return to sleep without pressure or judgment. On the 4th day, Clara finally woke up fully. She sat up and looked around the small house. It was simple and old, with cracked walls and a tin roof, but it was clean and peaceful. Through the window, she could see Samuel working at his welding station outside, sparks flying as he repaired someone's broken gate. This was a different world from David's mansion. There was no marble floor, no expensive furniture, no servants rushing around. But there was something here that David's house never had. There was genuine warmth. There was real kindness. There was peace. Elizabeth came in with tea. "How are you feeling, child?" she asked gently. Clara's voice cracked as she answered, "Better. Thank you for everything." Elizabeth patted her hand. "We help each other in this life. That's what humans are supposed to do." Days turned into weeks. Clara slowly began to heal, both physically and emotionally. She helped Elizabeth with household chores, grateful to have something useful to do. She cooked, cleaned, and washed clothes in the backyard with the old metal basin. At first, neighbors whispered when they saw her. The story of the failed wedding had reached every corner of town. People pointed and gossiped. Some said she deserved what happened because she must have truly been cursed. Others felt sorry for her but kept their distance, afraid that bad luck might be contagious. Clara endured the stares and whispers without defending herself. What could she say? If she told the truth about taking the blame for Michelle's crime, nobody would believe her anyway. David's family was too powerful, too respected. She was nobody. So she chose silence. She chose to let people think whatever they wanted while she focused on rebuilding her life piece by piece. She learned that sometimes the strongest response to lies is simply to live well and let time reveal the truth. Samuel never asked her about the wedding or what had happened. He treated her with quiet respect, always maintaining proper distance. He would come home from work in the evenings, eat dinner with his mother and Clara, then go to bed early. Simple, respectful, kind. 3 months passed. Clara found small jobs around the neighborhood, mending clothes and helping elderly women with cooking. It wasn't much money, but it was honest work. She began to feel like a human being again instead of a cursed object. One evening, Samuel came home earlier than usual. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot as he stood near the kitchen where Clara was preparing vegetables. "Clara," he said quietly, "can I speak with you?" Elizabeth, sensing something important, excused herself and went to visit a neighbor. Samuel sat down at the small wooden table, his rough hands folded in front of him. He looked at Clara with complete sincerity in his eyes. "I know you've been through terrible pain," he began. "I know the world has been cruel to you. I know you're still healing. So I want to say this carefully, and you can take all the time you need to think about it." Clara's heart began to beat faster. She had a feeling she knew what was coming. "I'm just a simple welder," Samuel continued. "I don't have wealth or education or a big house. But I have honest hands and a good heart. I see who you truly are. A woman who can cover disgrace without breaking. A woman who helps others even when she has nothing. A woman strong enough to rebuild from ashes." He paused, gathering courage. "Will you marry me?" Samuel asked. His voice shook slightly, but his eyes were steady. "Not because I pity you. Not because you need rescue. But because I believe that a woman who can carry such heavy burdens with such quiet dignity can help me build a good life. A life based on real things, not on pretending or impressing others." Clara stared at him in shock. Nobody had ever spoken to her like this. David had talked about her beauty, about how she would look good beside him at events. But Samuel was talking about her character, her strength, her worth as a human being. "I'm not asking for an answer today," Samuel added quickly. "Take your time. Think about it. Pray about it. But I wanted you to know that I see you. The real you. And I would be honored to spend my life with you." That night, Clara lay awake thinking. She had lost everything chasing a man who saw her as decoration. Now a man with nothing was offering her everything that mattered: respect, partnership, genuine love. It took her 2 weeks to decide. 2 weeks of watching Samuel work hard every day, treat his mother with tenderness, and handle difficulties with patience. 2 weeks of comparing this simple, honest man with the rich, cruel one she had almost married. Finally, she gave her answer. Yes. They married on a quiet Sunday morning in a tiny church at the edge of town. Only Elizabeth and 2 church choristers were present as witnesses. Clara wore a simple white dress that Elizabeth had sewn for her. Samuel wore his best clean shirt, carefully ironed the night before. There were no photographers, no 300 guests, no long train dragging behind the bride. Just 2 people making vows in the presence of God, promising to support each other through whatever life brought. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed Clara's forehead with such gentleness that she cried. These were different tears from the ones she had cried on her wedding day with David. These were tears of relief, gratitude, and the beginning of real joy. They walked home together through dusty streets, hand in hand. Neighbors watched through windows, some shaking their heads in judgment, others smiling with quiet approval. Clara didn't care what anyone thought anymore. She had learned that public opinion could change like weather. What mattered was character, consistency, and kindness. That night, in their small room with its cracked walls and thin mattress, Clara felt more secure than she ever had in David's mansion. She was truly home. She was truly loved. She was truly valued for who she was, not for what she could provide or how she made someone else look. Life moved forward in its quiet way. Clara and Samuel built their days around simple rhythms: work, meals, evening conversations, helping neighbors. Nothing fancy, nothing impressive, but everything real. 4 months after their wedding, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She had been feeling sick in the mornings and noticed her body changing. When the local clinic confirmed it, she walked home in a daze of joy and disbelief. The pregnancy she had longed for during her years with David, the child that had never come despite all her prayers, was now growing inside her. With Samuel, the man everyone had dismissed as poor and unimportant, God had opened her womb. When she told Samuel the news, he cried. Actual tears rolled down his weathered cheeks as he knelt and placed his ear against her belly, even though there was nothing to hear yet. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for giving me this gift." Elizabeth was overjoyed. She immediately began preparing baby clothes, using scraps of fabric she had saved for years. Neighbors who had once gossiped about Clara now brought small gifts, vegetables, old baby items. Slowly, the community was embracing her again. The pregnancy was gentle and peaceful. Clara didn't have expensive prenatal vitamins or fancy doctors, but she had something better. She had peace. She had love. She had a husband who rubbed her swollen feet and stayed up with her when she couldn't sleep. Meanwhile, across town in David's mansion, a different story was unfolding. David had married someone new just 4 months after abandoning Clara. Her name was Victoria, a woman from another wealthy family, beautiful and polished in the way rich people value. David had posted their wedding photos all over social media. He wanted everyone to see how quickly he had moved on, how little Clara had meant to him. Victoria wore an even more expensive dress than Clara's had been. Their wedding had even more guests, even more extravagance. Victoria became pregnant almost immediately. David was thrilled. He posted ultrasound pictures online with captions like, "God has blessed me with the right woman, and this is what happens when you choose correctly." He wanted Clara to see these posts. He wanted her to feel like she had missed out, like he had won. He didn't know that Clara had deleted all her social media accounts months ago. She wasn't watching his life anymore. She had moved on to something better. David's family celebrated Victoria's pregnancy with a huge party. His mother finally had a daughter-in-law she could brag about. His father gained political points from the connection to Victoria's wealthy family. Everything seemed perfect in their world. But perfection built on lies always has cracks. And those cracks were about to split wide open. Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy on a rainy Tuesday morning. The labor was long and difficult, but Elizabeth and Samuel stayed by her side through every moment. When the baby finally arrived, crying loudly with strong lungs, the small room filled with joy. They named him Joseph, which means God will add. It was their prayer and their testimony. God had taken away everything Clara had, then added back something infinitely better. The villagers who came to see the baby whispered among themselves. "God has answered her in silence," they said. He waited until the right time, then blessed her with the right man. Clara held her son close, breathing in his baby smell, feeling his tiny heartbeat against her chest. She thought about how she used to pray desperately for a child with David, how she had felt broken and worthless when it didn't happen. Now she understood. God had been protecting her. God had been saving this blessing for a man who would truly cherish it. 2 months later, Clara became pregnant again. Samuel could barely believe it. "Are you sure?" he kept asking, looking at her belly in wonder. 2 blessings in 2 years? Their daughter was born on a bright Sunday afternoon. They named her Grace because that's what their entire story had become, a testimony of God's grace transforming pain into purpose. While Clara's home filled with the sounds of children laughing and growing, David's mansion was filling with something else: tension. Victoria's belly had grown large with pregnancy, and David had made sure everyone knew about his coming heir. He posted constantly online, showing off expensive baby furniture, designer baby clothes, and a nursery that cost more than some people's yearly salary. He wanted the world to see that he was winning at life, that he had made the right choice by leaving Clara. But something was bothering him. At night, David couldn't sleep. He woke up sweating, gasping for air, haunted by dreams of falling, of pits opening beneath his feet, of white fabric dragging him down into darkness. In his dreams, he saw Clara's face as she fell into the pit. He heard his own voice saying, "If she dies, that is her fate." He saw Samuel jumping down to save her while he stood frozen, paralyzed by his own selfishness. During the day, David pushed these thoughts away. He convinced himself that he had done nothing wrong, that Clara had indeed been cursed, that he had made a smart decision. But at night, the truth hunted him in his dreams. Victoria noticed his restlessness. "What's wrong?" she would ask. "Why do you keep waking up screaming?" "Nothing," David would lie. "Just work stress." But Victoria had her own secrets. Secrets that would soon explode into the light and destroy everything David thought he had built. One afternoon, a neighbor saw Victoria getting into a car with another man. The neighbor was old Mrs. Chin, who lived across the street and noticed everything. She watched as Victoria kissed this man before getting in the car. Not a friendly kiss. A passionate kiss. Mrs. Chin didn't say anything at first. She thought maybe she had seen wrong. Maybe it was a relative. But the second time she saw it happen, she knew. Victoria was having an affair. The third time Mrs. Chin saw them together, she quietly took a photo with her phone. Not to gossip, but as evidence, just in case the truth needed proving later. Meanwhile, David remained oblivious. He was too busy planning for his baby's arrival, too busy posting updates online, too busy building his image. He didn't notice his wife's late-night phone calls. He didn't notice how she would smile at her phone screen when she thought he wasn't looking. He didn't notice anything wrong at all. Then one day David came home early from work. He had forgotten an important document and needed to retrieve it. As he entered the house, he heard Victoria's voice coming from the bedroom, talking on the phone. David stood in the hallway, frozen, listening to his wife's conversation. She was speaking in a hushed, intimate tone he had never heard her use with him. "I miss you too," Victoria whispered into the phone. "Yes, the baby is fine. Don't worry. He doesn't suspect anything. He's too busy being proud to notice the truth." David's blood ran cold. He pushed the bedroom door open. Victoria jumped, dropping her phone. Her face went white. "Who was that?" David demanded. "Nobody," Victoria stammered. "Just a friend." But David had already grabbed her phone from where it fell. He looked at the messages, the call history, the photos. Everything was there. Evidence of a months-long affair with Victoria's ex-boyfriend, a man named Marcus. The worst part came when David found a voice note from Marcus, sent just 2 days earlier. His hands shook as he pressed play. "Baby," Marcus's voice came through the speaker, confident and mocking. "I can't wait for our child to be born. It's going to be hard watching him raise my son, but at least we'll know the truth." The room spun. David's legs gave out. He collapsed onto the bed, staring at nothing. The child Victoria was carrying, the child he had been celebrating online, bragging about to everyone, wasn't even his. David's fury erupted like a volcano. He confronted Victoria with the evidence, his voice shaking with rage and betrayal. She tried to deny it at first, then broke down crying, admitting everything. The affair had started before their wedding, continued through their marriage, and the baby was definitely Marcus's. She had known from the beginning but chose to let David believe it was his because his money and status were better than what Marcus could provide. David didn't just confront Victoria. His rage carried him further. He found out where Marcus worked and confronted him there, in front of Marcus's co-workers. A physical fight broke out. Police were called. Witnesses recorded everything on their phones. By that evening, the story was all over social media. The same platforms David had used to brag about his perfect life now broadcasted his humiliation. Videos of the fight went viral. Screenshots of the voice notes circulated everywhere. People who had admired David's wealth and success now laughed at his shame. The scandal grew worse. News sites picked it up. Bloggers wrote articles. David's father's political campaign collapsed under the weight of the family scandal. His mother refused to leave the house, ashamed to face their social circle. Everything David had built on lies and cruelty came crashing down in spectacular fashion. The story reached Clara through a neighbor who came to visit, bringing vegetables from her garden. The neighbor couldn't help herself, she had to share the gossip about David's dramatic downfall. Clara listened in silence, sitting on her porch with baby Grace sleeping in her arms and little Joseph playing nearby with wooden blocks Samuel had made for him. She listened to every detail, how Victoria had betrayed David, how the child wasn't his, how his entire world had collapsed. When the neighbor finished talking, waiting eagerly for Clara's reaction, Clara simply looked down at her daughter's peaceful sleeping face. A soft smile touched her lips, not of bitterness or revenge, but of understanding. She lifted her eyes to the neighbor and spoke just one sentence, a proverb her mother had taught her long ago. When a man rejects gold to chase glitter, time will teach him the difference. Then she gently rocked Grace and called to Joseph to come have his afternoon snack. She didn't say anything else about David. She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate his pain. She simply returned to her life, the real life she had built on foundations of truth, sacrifice, and genuine love. The neighbor walked away, somehow feeling like she had witnessed something profound. Clara had won without fighting. She had risen without crushing others. Her silence had been louder than any revenge. Peace, it turns out, is the final verdict. What lesson did you learn from this story? Does silence sometimes speak louder than defense? Share your thoughts below.